welcome back to another episode, the South Star Classroom. That's David. I am Charles, and we are back ready to have another amazing conversation in these education streets so that you leave with tools and whatever information you need to be equipped with so you can get the most for your kids, your community, whomever, because Black and brown kids are not getting what they deserve. So right now, two really important announcements. Our brother with the very, very lush black hair is out living his best life. We do not have him today. He is on the road doing the Lord's work, and I hope he's enjoying himself and taking in some sun. My other brother, David, right now is in a remote location that you don't need to know about with his family, enjoying himself. But the one thing about amazing remote locations is while they may have great scenery and let you get away from things, they tend to have sucky Wi-Fi. So we may or may not lose David throughout, but just know he is with us the entire time. My black ass is just at home. I'm just here. So, but I'm happy to be home because I've been on the road, I feel like the last million episodes in a row. So I'm glad to be back with my camera, my set, and my background. So what we're going to do today is we've been combing these education news streets so you don't have to. And there's just a few stories that have stuck out to us, and we both picked one or two to just kind of highlight. Stop wiping your brow. You're gonna give away that your location is in a very hot place, brother. Not that there's like not that many in the world, but we gonna do it. Where in the world is Carmen Sandiego? But we're gonna go to David first. David, why don't you tell us how you're doing? And then you had an article that was really interesting. Again, it's really tough. I'll be trying not to dive into the article, so when we get here, the conversation is fresh and I'm not, it's not rehearsed. But it was a very interesting education article. So tell us how you're doing, and then go into your article.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. And thanks everybody for being here. If you are on the stream on any of our platforms, please make sure to press the like and share with your networks. And we've got some really good content for you today. So make sure that you're engaging in the comments as well. We'll do our best to reciprocate. Yeah, we're in the middle of summer. We're on a family vacation at an undisclosed desert location. It's quite hot. It's probably about 106 degrees outside right now. But it's a good opportunity just to kind of, cleanse the first half of the year away, and just really get some downtime with the family. So that's what we're doing. It's good to be here with you today, Charles. We obviously miss Don Omar, wherever he is in his escapades. He's obviously deserves a really, true and honest summer break as well. Hopefully he'll be back next week. But yeah, we it's summertime. And like I said, in some of our social media promotion, we don't stop here at the South Star Classroom. We want to make sure that we are doing our work and our job of filtering through all things education, focusing primarily on education news and activities and actions and campaigns that will impact Black and brown children and other students that have been furthest from opportunity in our school systems. And so we've got a lot of news that came through this week. We're going to do kind of a two-pronged show. We're going to cover two topics. Ultimately, everything is related. But yeah, we've got some good content for you today. And would you like us to just jump straight in, Charles, or how do you want to?
Yeah, let's just do it. Yeah, let's just do it. That gives us more time to chat and just do our thing.
Let's do it. Also, okay, great.
Send love to the Roku community that is out there with us. Thank y'all for joining us, and the people that get to sit at home and watch us on their TVs. We appreciate you. Welcome into our world.
Yep. Welcome to all of our new and returning Roku listeners as well. So first of all, what we're going to look at today, the first piece has to do with the school year, the school years that have just wrapped up, kind of coming out of the pandemic, and what's happening with school discipline. We know historically what school discipline has looked like. Some of the same outcomes, and when you disaggregate the data, when you look across academics, you see the same disparities when we look at discipline data with students, Latino students, African American students, mainly boys, as well as special education students, generally across the board, receiving higher number of suspensions as well as expulsions than their peers. So we have an achievement gap, an opportunity gap within our schools, but we also have this other gap that essentially leads to, you can call it what you want, a dropout or a push out, but it's really the origins and the beginnings of the process of disenfranchising particular types of students in our public school systems. And this leads to the longer path or pipeline that we call the school to prison pipeline. We're talking now specifically about special education, Black and brown students. We know this historically. So what we're looking at are two pieces. One was coming out of Chalkbeat, the other coming out of the 74. And they both kind of tell the same, this different sides of the same coin. The Chalkbeat story says that, physical violence, things like this were definitely up and higher. And these couple of years that we've come back into in-person learning across the board. In some districts, suspensions actually went down. In some districts, suspensions went up. And so it's kind of a mixed bag in terms of what you're seeing. And I want to point out, let's see, there's a couple of statistics that I'll pull out here in this Chalkbeat piece. Thank you, Charles. They talk about New York, and then they talk about some of the data coming out of Georgia. So let's see, let's pull out, let's see, give me a second here. So in New York City, for example, the nation's largest school district, recently fights and violence in schools is actually down compared to the 18-19 school year, pre-pandemic. So, physical violence in schools in New York is down. Looking at Dallas and Houston, they've also seen a decline in physical violence in schools. When we look at Duval County in Florida, Duval County schools, they had a 47% increase in infractions for fighting compared to 18-19. So it's really kind of a mixed bag. In some districts, we're seeing a decrease in physical violence in schools, and in others, we are seeing an uptick. So really kind of a mixed bag coming out of the pandemic. Now, if we transition over to, because what we know is, looking at data, it's really important not just to look at the top level of data, but all kinds of data. We've got to disaggregate and go a little bit deeper. Even though the whole picture might seem rosier, we've got to drill down, right? And so the second piece that we're going to look at, and then we'll have a discussion, in a nutshell, put out by Joe Napolitano from the 74. And what we've got to do, Charles, is start bringing some of these journalists on that are writing these stories to do this in real time. But that's for a later discussion, because they're putting out some good stuff and it's very timely. Essentially, what this piece is arguing or stating is looking at a new study out of NYU, right? Shows that student behavior worsened last year. Schools were more likely to use the kind of old school out of school suspension methods as opposed to restorative justice. And the highest impact here, what this NYU research study showed, was that there was a higher impact for Black and special education students. So even though overall we might have seen a mixed bag during the pandemic around school discipline, what we were also looking at when you kind of peel back the layers of the onion is that for Black and special education students coming out of the pandemic, higher numbers, higher percentages of discipline for them. So almost like we have academic achievement gaps that have grown with learning loss. We also have this other double impact for Black and special education students coming out of the pandemic, where they're essentially, continuing to be forced out of school via old school kind of one size fits all methods, meaning the use of the suspension from school for students, right? We can look at some of the particular data, and we'll do that, but I wanted to give you a chance to reflect on what we're talking about right now. This has the Atlanta, Georgia data, which we'll look at. But I wanted to get your thoughts on this, Charles. I mean, I think, top line is we knew pre-pandemic for Black children, brown children, special education children, their percentages for discipline are much higher than their actual percentages in school, right? So they're being over disciplined in schools. What this piece also says is that many districts that had taken on certain causes like restorative justice or alternatives to suspension actually pulled back and did what's most comfortable and what they know how to do well, and that's just suspend students based on some kind of a behavior matrix, like you did X, so therefore Y happens, right?
Yeah.
And then you see these numbers grow, and coming out of the pandemic, kids are just getting back into school, and what we see are school systems putting these kids back out on the corner. So
yeah, I mean, so let me get this straight from my perspective, as I'll be the surrogate for like the crowd. So basically,
yep.
Before the pandemic happened, Black and brown kids was being suspended at crazier rates, expelled at crazier rates, and just disciplined in a different way, a bit more harsh. This pandemic happens, throws everything up in the air, and surprise, surprise, it has gotten worse. And not only has it gotten worse, it has gotten disproportionately worse for Black and brown kids. And we are now seeing research and data that's coming out that confirms that, is what I'm hearing.
Absolutely. And the study actually references specific two groups, which are actually Black students in special education. So to give you an example,
another vulnerable group. It's not on top of being Black, on top of being brown, on top of probably being poor, whatever the case is, whatever comes with that. These are also young people that have been designated for special education. And we already know, and we also know that Black kids, especially Black boys, are put into special education at disproportionate rates. So there's all these different things in the ether that are happening. And then a lot of people will just sum up this and say, but let's blame the pandemic. Let's blame this like we've done with everything else. I think, didn't Biden it was a tweet he put out like a day or two ago, and I think we both comment on it, where he was just like, oh, and math scores are down because of the pandemic. It's like, well, no, it's been down. It was down before. But so my reaction is this. You said this before. People wiser than us have said this before. When America catches a cold, you know what I'm saying? Black people, brown people, poor people, they get the damn flu. They get the whooping flu. They get COVID flu. They get stuff that kills them. And I think that's what we're seeing. That what I see is that these issues don't just get bad for everybody. They disproportionately and like compounded. They compoundedly, which may not be a word, but they compoundedly get worse for Black kids and brown kids and poor kids and kids in special ed. And when you meet a myriad of these different things, this is why shows like this is why us talking about agency, this is why us trying to give you knowledge and information is so important, is because everybody's kids are at risk, but your kids are doubly, triply, quadruply at risk to have these things happen. Yeah. And then when you talk about something, I'm from Oakland, and I'm basically the home of restorative justice on some level. Somebody gonna fact check that and say it started here, but whatever. Oakland is very well known for restorative justice. Like that is, and I think a lot of people just think restorative justice is letting kids off the hook, letting people off the hook. No, man. Restorative justice circles and processes are actually very difficult, especially when you do them correctly, but they are built to be disciplined and hold accountable from people that love you, so we can restore you to the community. We can restore what was taken away. We can restore what was lost. And in getting rid of those things, with all this stuff happening, is just making kids even more vulnerable. Our kids are just more in the crosshairs of like this system that does not love them. It don't serve them well. It don't love them. It pushes them to get in trouble. And then when they react a certain way, it just basically confirms what they thought. And oh yeah, we found this thing that works, restorative justice, But instead of actually diving into it and actually doing the training and actually taking up these very disciplined practices, you wanted something surface level. So now you just want to get rid of it. My reaction to this is a war. And just because you don't know you in a war does not mean that you can't be a casualty. What happens in war is that there are two sides, and actually it's not a war, because in a war, there seems to be a chance for the other side. Our people are being slaughtered. We have to realize that there's a war on our kids' brains. There's a war on our kids' minds. There's this culture war that Black, brown, poor people are getting swept up in the middle of. And when the elephants fight, the grass suffers, man. We are the grass.
Exactly.
And I think that is what my reaction is, especially with my article being at the top of my mind as I'm listening to you, which is a very different article, but it comes to the same conclusion. How do we protect our grass? How do we make sure that we put things and thorns and safety apparatus around our grass so we stop letting our babies get stomped out? This ain't even just about us. This is what they're doing to our children. So if that's the case, like, how does our village stand up? And hopefully you leave here with some knowledge around that. So that is my very long-winded, very me processing live in the moment, but that's my honest to God reaction to what you just presented to me.
Yeah, and it's good information. I mean, I'm glad that we're able to bring it out to our listeners, as well as our new listeners, because even though we're smack dab in the middle of summertime, we're heading into a new school year, and given this trend, specifically looking at the suspension data, we've got to raise this flag, because our kids are heading in for another full school year, and the school systems are not demonstrating that they're willing to take a different approach. Instead, actually pulling back and going back to the old draconian kind of, like I said, one size fits all. If the only tool that you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. We are just going to grow and exponentially grow the push out from our schools, primarily for special education, Black and brown students, and that does lead directly to it funnels right into the school to prison pipeline. So these are not, people have written about this. This has been studied. There are books written about this, and so I think as we're talking about reopening schools, as we're talking about learning loss, we also have to be thinking about, given the impacts of the pandemic on different communities, sure, children and families bring that, that pain, the suffering, the trauma into schools. It manifests itself in the form of different behaviors. The question for schools is, how do they address those behaviors? What tools do schools and school systems have to address behavior, create safe learning conditions without suspending kids out the gate left and right? I mean, it's 2022. I think Oakland is a good example, even though we criticize their data, like they're long-term committed to restorative justice, right?
Right.
And so, you have other large districts that are, really, you talk to administrators and teachers and they say, well, that sounds nice, but we don't have access to any of that training. I'm like, what do you have? Oh, we have a discipline handbook. That's what we have. And that's all they have. And that's not really a tool, right? That's an after the fact. It's not even an intervention, because interventions happen before, right? The only thing that suspending kids does is it begins the process of disenfranchising children and their families and their communities from schools. It sends a message: you're not wanted here. You don't belong here. So we're going to send you to the special school, to the continuation school, and you might do well there, you might not. And then, what's after that? We know what the data says, especially for Black and brown children and special education children, right? The life outcomes, the earning potential, the probability of ending up in the criminal justice system. It's all very, very real. So I wanted to point out, so we can actually look at a data point, and then we'll maybe pop over to, after closing out, pop over to the other topic is this new NYU study. They studied several large urban districts, right? And this report's about a month old. They looked at an Atlanta metro area school district. Don't know exactly what district it is, but it's a 13,000 student district, right? And they looked at their discipline going back, what looks like maybe 8 years. During the pandemic, they found that suspensions plummeted, but Black students still were more likely to face punishment compared to white and Hispanic students, right? So you see the gap growing. Also, looking at some particular subgroups, this Georgia district, we don't know what the name of the district is, but you can imagine this is happening across the board in other districts. This is like a random sample, not so random. Looking at their referrals, such as a teacher sending a student to the principal's office during in-person learning. So you're pulling a kid out of the learning environment already, right? While it declined in the 2021 school year, 82% of those referrals were for Black children, who only made up 48% of the student body, right? So we call that a disproportionate outcome, right? It should be 48 to 48 or 50 to 48, but you're looking at 82% of referrals for Black children when Black children only made up 48% of this district. Special education in this one district, 15% of all students in this district have an IEP, which is pretty standard, maybe a little low. 42% of the referrals were students with IEPs. So from 15% to 42%, right? Okay. Another disparate outcome, a disproportionate outcome, right? We call that disproportionality. And so, you know, we saw this is coming out of last year's data. We're going into the next school year. And I think the question for us here and on the show, you know, is how do we help push schools and school systems to rethink the way that they've been, operationalizing discipline on their school campuses and their school systems, away from, again, like draconian suspension oriented systems to more restorative intervention based strategies. And that's all professional development, professional learning. It's all stuff that happens in the classroom, stuff that we've done. And so I want to make sure that, you know, we call it out on today's show, and we're going to continue to call it out because this data is totally unacceptable. Anybody that says anything about, you know, learning loss, good for you. Keeping kids out of school for too long, good for you. Record levels of federal funding coming into our public school systems, great. But what kind of outcomes do we expect from this? And nobody's talking about this discipline issues, specifically as it relates, in this case, to Black students and special education students. So we are.
Hey, yeah, man, we definitely are. I think, and again, so for people that are listening again, you're talking to two people that got a little bit more insider baseball kind of knowledge around how this stuff works. But what this means for you is, if you're watching this and you got a Black kid, whether it's a boy or a girl, the chances are very high that you've gotten a call home regarding a disciplinary action, that your kid is being reprimanded or something is happening, this, that, and the third. And I think that kids act up. It happens. Like here's where this is why I love doing our show, David, because we can add the nuance, okay? Because I've also been in rooms where people say, we ain't suspending nobody. We ain't suspending nobody. And I remember being a student, and I remember having a teacher like that, and there was like these two kids that would just terrorize class. I'm not saying these are bad kids. I'm not saying that they don't deserve better or whatever the case is, but there were many classes that I just did not learn anything in that classroom because those young people were still in that space. And like, we have to find a better way to be adults and to make sure that kids are learning, that we're not just suspending kids willy-nilly, but also like, how, if you have to remove a kid from a space, how do you reintroduce that young person? How do you make sure that all kids are able to learn? How do we make sure that 3 or 4 kids are not messing up for the other 20 some odd young people that are in that space? These are tough questions that well-paid adults should have to deal with and grapple with an answer. And I'm not just talking about teachers. I'm talking about admin. I'm talking about, there's a lot of people that get paid to be in education. And just because an issue was difficult or hard or complicated is not an excuse to not address it and not deal with it. And I think the other thing is, man, it's like, for parents, you have to be vigilant. You have to be on top of your kid. You got to do pop-ups. If your kid, one of the kids that they keep saying got an issue, okay, well, let's do a pop-up and let's see how that's going. Like, I know kids act different when their parents there. Don't tell them you're there. I've definitely seen parents, some eyes pop up in that little window so they could just watch their kid for like 20, 30 minutes. And then until a kid finds out, who mama is that? Who mama is that over there? You know what I mean? But you have to be a part of this game, man, because let's say your kid is the kid that's being targeted, picked on, or your kid is rightfully being an asshole in the classroom. Like, let's just, because it happens. I've been an asshole in the classroom before. You're still their best advocate, and you need to be there. Like, yeah, you still their best advocate. And here's the thing, and for my educators watching, parents are actually pretty reasonable. Like, if somebody calls David and say, look, I had little David today. This is how it started. This is what was going on. This is what I said to them. You know what I mean? Like, if you come to a parent early and with respect, they'll get on them. I'm telling you, when I was a kid, David, my parents didn't believe me over no teacher. It's a different time now, but my parents were like, Miss Hawkins ain't got a lie on you, boy. I don't know. It wasn't me. Was you talking? But I was talking back. Somebody said that ain't what I asked you. Was you talking? And I think that in issues like this, man, it might seem as innocent as like being of talking in class, but research is showing when a black kid gets suspended 2 times, the chances of them dropping out of high school or not going to college, it grows exponentially. It don't just jump a few percentage points. It grows exponentially. And that's just not a track that you want to have to fight your way back from on top of everything else that's happening.
Yep. Yeah. And you know, I'm not suggesting that we do either or, like a zero discipline world, because I've seen that too. And I'm like, no, there's something happened in your classroom and we're going to address it. You know, versus having super strict and rigid rules. Like everything else that we talk about, I think, like this next topic, there's a gray area, there's a nuance, that we're going to talk about. And I think that's where the hard work lies, right? These are not binary subjects, or there's no just 2 approaches, there's multiple approaches. And you're right, teachers need the tools. They get those tools from other teachers and from admin. Admin get those tools from their districts. And that's what, people should be focusing on right now, instead of, so many other things that don't have anything to do with education, focusing on, not classroom management, but classroom environment, training teachers to be able to work with children from backgrounds other than their own background, other genders, training teachers to deal with both implicit and explicit bias, which is alive and well in our schools. How to talk with families, how to approach families, and this goes for teachers and for admins as well. How do we talk to families about discipline issues? Do we blame the child, or do we sit down and have a group, circle discussion about, finding solutions, right? Or are we rushing straight to discipline? And so these are all good things. And I think, again, what you mentioned, if you're a parent, and if you're a parent of a Black child or a brown child or a child with IEP that learns in an exceptional manner, and you find yourself on the receiving end of this, like so many of us have, it's going to happen. Find an advocate, talk to other parents at your school site. You don't have to be in this alone. There are other people that can help and will step in as supporters for you. So, talk to other people, talk to us. You're not alone in this. And there are ways to, sometimes we have to teach our schools to be better educators. Amen. Sometimes we have to teach our admins to be better admins. And, when we work together, from this side of the table, that's what we can do. So,
man, I think that, I think you hit the nail on the head, man. And I think that for parents, again, it ain't easy. We know it's not easy. Nobody's saying it's easy. But what we are saying is you have to be a player. You have to be present in these conversations. You have to be there. You have to work with these people like, yo, okay, well, when mine is acting up, this is what we're going to do. Like, we need a plan together. You need to be talking to me. Like, if you're not there, I'm telling you, man, they will throw your baby to the wolves, and maybe they won't, but why even take that chance? Like, if maybe you do got the best teachers in the world, man, and if you do, you lucky, you blessed, but you can't operate that way. The same way when you learn how to drive, they teach you to be a defensive driver. I want you to be a defensive education advocate for your kids. Like, like, I'm not saying you the bad driver, but you got to watch out for the other bad drivers on the road. That's the same mentality I need you to have in your school. If somebody lets you into the lane, God bless you. But you have to drive in a defensive manner, and you have to like guide and shepherd through a defensive manner. And here's a preemptive manner to where I can just take this conversation. I had a very different article, and my article focused on the one and only Texas. And I'm so sad that Tejas, as Miss Toya so affectionately calls Omar, is not here for this, because anytime something happens in Texas, I hold Omar personally accountable for everything in Texas. So let's just look at this article real quick. So when they talk about this push to remove sexually explicit books divides a Texas district. Now, let me just give you the high level facts, and I'll make sure that you have the link. It's a Wall Street Journal article. There's 80 or so books that have been identified to be taken off, right? And a lot of people feel that it's a direct attack on the LGBTQ plus community. And the books, many of the books that they cited had sexually explicit passages or vivid imagery or whatnot. And a lot of people are very upset about it. BuzzFeed took some of the books and they had their staff go read them and kind of make a list off the top 5 books you should read from this list type thing, right? And the one thing people have to understand is anytime you tell somebody what they can't do, they're going to want to double down and do more of it. Here's the nuanced piece of this. I don't think that a lot of parents would be in disagreement with any sexually explicit, out of context scenes or acts being available for kids in middle school and high school. It might be a lot looser in high school, right? I don't think that's the issue. I think that one of the issues is, one, we don't have common sense and we don't take this on a case by case basis. But 2, they'll usually use certain things as the trigger point, but then they'll Trojan horse a lot of other things in. For folks that did not get to read all that great history and all that, didn't read the classics, the Trojan horse is basically when this army was trying to find a way into this very fortified kingdom, and they did it by offering a pagan Trojan statue, and it had all the officers, all of the people in the war were hiding inside of it. Okay. I think that that's the thing that people tend to worry about, because they'll give an example of like this explicit sex scene, but then they'll tack on, well, that book talks about racism. That book talks about what it means to be a woman in Mexico. This one talks about how this used to be Mexican land before it was United States land, and that doesn't fall in line with our values. People get really afraid of like the slippery slopes. And we've all read books like this when we were younger. David has probably even taught them. When you talk about the 1984s or books of that nature, where they talk about censorship and they talk about banning of books. And so Texas is very, very, let's just have a real honest conversation. I'm going to bring David back into this. There's 3 states, okay? There are 3 states that have taken on this culture war head on. It's Texas, California, and New York, okay? These are the places because they are 3 of the largest places in the country. They have 2 of the strongest left and right-leaning bases in the country. So New York and California are very strong left, have a stranglehold, and Texas has a very strong right-leaning just hold on the country. So these countries tend to be the first to do something, and then other places will take that as precedent. And so Texas is very, very firmly situating itself in these culture wars. So my question to you is, we can go deeper into the book, the book banning. We can talk about those things, but how are you seeing these culture wars affect Black and brown people that tend to be just caught in this crossfire at the moment, especially coming off of COVID?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think aside from so the article that you referenced was mainly about books that had to do, well, it was both, but it started with some of the sexual education content, and then like you said, kind of like this Trojan horse into like, oh, well, we also don't like what you write about slavery, and we actually don't even like that you call it slavery. Let's call it
Right.
involuntary relocation, right? So I agree with you on that point. I think the challenge here is like, and if you look at what the way that this group, quote unquote, parent group, um, took, they approach this is normally if you have a book in a library, or if your child brings home a book, you start with, and this is both me as a parent, as an education advocate, and also as a former teacher and former school leader, is you
Mhm.
start, at that step one. Step one is like, you're my teacher, Dr. Charles Cole, you're my kid's teacher. You send this book home. I'm questioning it. I'm going to go to you first. You
Mhm.
might go to your department chair. Your department chair might take it to an AP. AP might take it to a principal, and then you go up and up and higher, right? What this particular parent group did in what's it called, Prosper Independent School District, looks like a very prosperous place, is
They
they,
said it is a wealthier northern Texas town.
yeah, it's exactly. And it's also hard to find disaggregated student outcomes, mainly white, but there are Latino and Black students there, but it's hard to find any of that data on the internet. But that's another subject. They launched their campaign of concern about particular books. And again, we're not here suggesting that they are totally right or totally wrong. I've looked at some of these titles and I'm like, my kid's in elementary school, not okay in my house, and then some of this other stuff, is fine. The question here is like, is the material developmentally appropriate for children, right? But now we're in
Mm.
this culture war, and so what is culturally appropriate is a totally different question to ask, right? I come from the school of like thinking about children and their planes of development, and what different children are, in general, able to kind of take in terms of content, in terms of education, in terms of imagery. But now we're in this culture war, and it's totally subjective, right? And so the way that they launched this campaign is, as a one line in the article, they essentially, they emailed the principal, and they CC the superintendent and the city council and the mayor and their Texas congressional representatives. I'm like, that's not that is Karen activism, right? You put this whole thing on blast. You get everybody involved, and if you're going to rely on government to solve your problem with a book that you might disagree with because your kid is in a government run school, our government has a process, right? You start at the
Mhm.
local level, and then if you don't get the right answer, you appeal, and you appeal, right? These people, somebody told them, they're like, this is how you're going to do it. You're going to get on the news. They had a media campaign. It's just, it's not, it's, and so it reeks of, I don't care what they're campaigning for or against, but it
Mhm.
reeks of privilege. It reeks of white privilege. And that's exactly what it is. So then for somebody like me, it gets kind of hard to like actually get involved in the conversation around what their actual concerns are because of the way that they went about it. I've been on the receiving end of this as a principal, where you have parents or a group of parents launch a similar campaign, and instead of following the order in which things should happen, they get involved. A city council member or a school district board member or a county. I've had county office of education board member trustees show up to my school because of an email they got from a parent. That's
Mm.
not how it works. You've got to go through the actual process and let the system work. You have to work through the system. And so that's my
Mhm.
initial response to it. Just, and also, advice for parents. When I see stuff like this, these people took full advantage of their political capital, their power, and their privilege. And so, it's very difficult for school systems to respond to these things because it's not how, it's historically not how things have worked.
Man, I mean, I think I agree with you, and I think that what is telling me, as the young people say, what is giving me is we put more stock into white parents' issues and their thoughts and their misgivings than we do for other people. And I mean, you and I have addressed this before. Remember when, like, last year when they were blowing everything up and saying, oh, this is parent voice. And people were like, well, like, they showing up to board meetings and stuff. And I'm like, David and I have been in Oakland for years. Like, we've gone to a ton of board meetings that had Black and brown parents lined up and were there till 11 p.m., 12 a.m., 1 a.m. before, advocating for stuff. And it just didn't get covered. Like, we really just got to stop believing that white ice is colder in every aspect. And what I mean by that is, if we're gonna listen to parents, you should listen to white parents. It's their babies. I'm not a crazy, like, right. I ain't got no problem with white people, and I ain't got no problem with white people advocating for their kids. And it actually kind of ain't always your fault that people might listen to you differently than they listen to other people. But I think you should be aware that when white moms in suburbia have issues, shit changes. When Black moms and brown moms have issues in the city, they get ignored or they get called names or somebody is paying them to be there. And that is just inherently racist. And I'm not calling anybody a racist. What I'm saying is it is inherently racist. It is one of those things that might be subconsciously happening. Yeah. Where it's like, oh, I'm listening to this. We're not talking about like we're not talking about like a mechanic, like we're not talking about two people giving their thoughts on like a Mercedes, and one is a car person and one has just only ridden a bike in their life. We're talking about parents who are on equal footing, and so I'm sure that over the years there's a lot of things that Black parents and brown parents have had issues with, and have brought it up and have tried to call their board member, have tried to call their trustee, have tried to go to board meetings and have something happen and it didn't. And now we're in this culture war, and people are drawing a line. And people are cherry picking the parents that they want to hear from and the ones that they don't. And my question to the people listening is, what are you going to do? How are you going to like combat that? Right. So here's my note to Black parents. I'll let David give it to brown parents. Black parents, get used to writing everything down. Get used to creating your own paper trails. Get used to emailing stuff. And every time this happens, you have this person in districts that's called an ombuds person. Okay. Learn who your ombuds person is. For y'all that don't know who that is, think of that as like your customer care person for the district. This is the person that will bank all these requests, that will bank these complaints, that will do what needs to be done that way. And you have to track this stuff. You have to, say per my last email. You have to keep dates. People and administrators respect emails and dates. Things that can embarrass them in local papers. You have to know how to hit people where things hurt, right? So, the other thing I would say is, don't get distracted by all these other sub issues that take your eye off the ball of overall achievement and the things that you need for your kid. There's always going to be something, and it's like a dog with like a tennis ball. If you throw out a bunch of them, the dog is going to be confused. But at some point, has to just, okay, I'm going for that tennis ball. You know what I mean? Like, they will do that. The district will do that. The district will do that to you. Any type of school will do that to you. So those are my pieces of advice, is that it's going to be a very emotional time, and these are emotional things. You have to channel that emotion. I'm not saying don't lead with it, because I lead with emotion all the time, but use that emotion as fuel to make sure your ducks are in a row. And then finally, if you can, because everybody can, if you got some options, it's like, again, I don't know why I keep talking about cars. Maybe I need to be in the market for a new car. The only way car negotiations work is if you are really, truly okay with walking away from that car deal. Once the dealer knows that you can't walk away from that car, once they know it, them numbers don't change that much. But when they know you about to go, okay, I started at Toyota, I'm about to leave and go to Honda. It's funny. It's wild how they come back with some new numbers and some new deals that they just could not get done before. Oh, and we're only doing this for you. So you have to be about your business. You have to handle the business when it comes to the education of your child. And if these two articles have not taught you anything less, just the takeaway is right now you are in the middle of a war, whether you know it or not, whether you care or not, whether you like it or not. There's a war going on outside that no man is safe from, especially your babies. How are you going to put a vest on them and protect them? That's what I think you should take from it, from all these articles that we've talked about today.
Yeah. We got a shout out. Watch the South Star Classroom on demand on BS3 TV on Roku. So thank you for the shout out there.
Absolutely. Thank you. Definitely
got to check that out. Yeah, I mean, I have a lot to say on this. I think like you, I'm less concerned about the actual, like the what, but more about the way. Number one, I think if you're a parent, going back to our earlier topic around like discipline, like if you feel like your student is being wrongfully or overly or disciplined out of nowhere, it's important that you understand that there's a process for that, right? And this is where you need to work with other parents and other parent advocates and other parent networks. We're out here. There's you've got other shows and other groups. One of the powers of online social media groups is like we can come together in those spaces and ask for guidance and support. And so making sure that you understand how that process works. And then once you understand how it works, hold the system accountable, because like you said, it's your baby, it's your child. There's nothing more important in the world. I think number two, there is a process for all of these things. And I think it's the role. I think this Texas article that you brought up, I think, white parents did what white parents frequently do. Whether they knew they were doing it or they didn't know they were doing it, they used their privilege and power, right? It's the definition of like white supremacy, whether you are doing it intentionally or not. And they, created a campaign out of nowhere, created a whole lot of hoopla, got a whole bunch of people involved, tied up a whole bunch of public resources for something that should have been done at the school or the district level through a curriculum committee, right? And that's the failure of that school system, where they didn't push back hard enough on this parent group. They gave in, right? And now it became a big story, and it's still not settled, and it's driven a huge dagger through this community, right? I think that's my second point. My third point was kind of riffing off of what you mentioned about like if you have a choice. It's really interesting to see some of the data that we're seeing now around declining enrollment in public districts, right? And it's happening for many reasons, but I think in one group we see Black and brown families that probably saw their children thrive during the pandemic when they weren't subject to so much of the racism and discipline at schools, and decided to keep their kids home for homeschooling or private schooling or micro schools or pods, right? That's a whole movement because they were exposed to too much racism in our large district government run systems. And then you have this other group of white parents that are peeling away from public government run schools because the schools are actually teaching about racism and they don't want it to be taught, right? And so it's very interesting. It's kind of like, and I think that's, symbolic of what we talk about. It's not either or. We talk about the nuance and understanding this. And it's important for teachers. It's important for school leaders and system leaders to understand all of these different dynamics that are at play.
Yeah, man. I think, look, we're at the end of this. Let's go on to our final thoughts, man. I just think that we looked at these things. I think these culture wars are raging on. I think that our kids are going to continue to be casualties in this war. Like I said, if you don't take anything away from this, I want you to just be aware at the very least, okay? 3 things I always care about: awareness, navigation, and duty. Awareness that this is happening, this is going on, and your kid is dead set in the middle. Navigation is, regardless of the level of fairness or right or wrong, is that your kid and you still have to navigate this minefield. You know what I mean? But duty is, once you know better, then we expect you to do better and share it and make sure your fellow parents and your fellow students and people in your community know better. You know what I mean? So awareness, navigation, and duty. That's my final piece. Why don't you take us home, David?
Yeah, I mean, I think so on the curriculum front, and again, I was a social science high school teacher, so a lot of this is near and dear to my heart. You know, in terms of curriculum, whether it's history curriculum or social studies curriculum, or even curriculum around certain like sexual education topics, I think these are all very important conversations. I think they're also regional, you know, like curriculum might look different in NYC schools, you know, New York City than it does in the schools in Boise, Idaho, right?
Mhm.
However, I think we do need to have, you know, when we teach history, you know, we need to teach honest history. I don't think we should be banning books left and right because they're offensive to a particular group of people that have been able to, you know, take advantage of the loudspeaker to get books banned, right? You know, what's offensive is the history of this country. When you're looking at Native American people, when you look at women, when you look at you know, African Americans, and when you look at you know, Mexican Americans, that's really what's offensive. And so we need to teach real history. When it comes to like sexual education, I really feel like we need to rely much more heavily on professionals, and again, this concept of what is developmentally appropriate for children. If people are uncomfortable with, you know, sex education being taught in schools that is developmentally appropriate, then they don't have to be in the public schools, right? They can go to a private school or they can go to a home school. But they really shouldn't be forcing school systems to abandon important information that children need to have because it makes them feel uncomfortable. I think our school systems need to push back on that quite a bit more. You know, and I think the third point is, you know, without getting into too much detail, for, you know, if you're running a charter school, if you're running a private school, you're running a charter network, if you're, you know, running a district school or a superintendent, coming out of this pandemic, looking at this data, we cannot ignore the needs of Black children, brown children, and children with exceptional needs, special education children. The data is pretty clear. It hasn't been a good return for them. We're pushing kids out of school, and I'm talking about pushing them out, you know, 10 minutes outside of the door, you know, to take a break is pushing a child out of the classroom. A one-day suspension is pushing a child out of the school system. We're disenfranchising children, and it's not fair to them. So, you know, we have the tools. There are districts that are doing restorative justice and other types of, you know, alternative methods to suspension. And I think if the Biden administration is going to talk big, you know, and you know, Education Secretary Cardona wants to talk big, they need to talk about, you know, this discipline data and what is the federal government going to do to push our states, our counties, and our districts to change their ways. It's 2022, and I think the time is now.
Man, I think that was beautiful, and we'll be back here next week. And I think just to double click on everything that you just said, man, I just think it's time for the adults to step up. I think it's time for the adults that are nobody that's tied to the left, not tied to the right, not trying to get a one up, but like really putting young people first and the needs of those young people first. I think it is, we need adults, and I think that we got some hollow ass adults in power right now, and are using your kids left and right to push whatever they need to push. And it's just not a game I want to play. This is not I do not like seeing my people continue to be pawns, man, and not have control.
And let me quote the great Sharif Filmeki here. You know, I think all of this ties to, for people working in schools, right? Teachers, principals, superintendents, mindset shift, right? That's really what we're talking about when it comes to curriculum and when it comes to discipline in our schools and how we deal with children and their families.
Hey man, I agree with you. And y'all can see us next week. You know, same bad time, same bad station. If you know that reference, you probably a old geezer like us. If you don't know it, get familiar with the original, you know what I'm saying, classic Batman series that that started this whole joint. You know what I'm saying? Go check out the Adam West Batman for a little bit. Damn it, you know. But
Bruce Wayne.
And I only saw it on reruns. I ain't that old. I saw it on reruns. So we will see y'all next time. Have a great one. Roku family, YouTube family, Facebook family. We love you all. We will see you. Peace.